Hi, fourth graders. We are starting to near the end of our measurement unit, which brings us to an important lesson for today, 14-9, changing metric units. Our goal is very simple. It's to do just that. It says, I can convert between metric units. Recall, there are 3 different types of measurement that we have been studying. We studied length, we studied capacity, and we studied weight or mass. In the metric system, all of these measurements have base units. So recall, the base unit for length is a meter, about a yard, about 3 feet, all in the ballpark there. Capacity, which base unit is a liter. Think of about half of a big bottle of soda. And last but not least, the base unit for mass, which is a gram, or about how much a dollar bill weighs. The metric system, as we've learned, all has to do with powers of 10. So the way that you're going to convert is always either by multiplying or dividing by a power of 10. I think you'll find it's actually a little bit easier than you may have thought. Before we begin to convert, let's actually take a look at the prefixes that help us understand just how much bigger or how much smaller each unit is. So in length, we also talked about a millimeter, we talked about a centimeter, and we talked about a decimeter. On the bigger side, we have a kilometer. For capacity, we kept it a little bit simpler. For capacity, we talked about a liter or we talked about a milliliter. And for mass, we talked about a gram or a kilogram. We did also briefly mention a milligram. The same is true for capacity. You also could have a kiloliter. What we need to think about is what each of these prefixes mean. So for instance, if I'm converting between a meter and a millimeter, I know that it's going to be 1,000 times more units if I measure a length in millimeters than in meters. So for instance, if I said my bookshelf is 1 meter wide, that would mean it's 1,000 millimeters wide. We'll keep practicing in just a moment. Before we get to converting though, take a look one more time at each of these different prefixes. Just like you did with changing customary units, for changing metric units, you're going to need to find the same unit before you can compare them. So for instance, before when you compared teaspoons to gallons, you had to change the gallons into teaspoons so that you're comparing using the same unit. Similar to fractions, right? You have to have the same denominator in order to compare. The same is going to be true for us with changing metric units and finding units that are in common. As you know from all of 4th grade, we have different processes in order to solve problems. Another word for these processes are algorithms. For converting metric units, we also have some algorithms. The first step is always to think, am I going from a bigger unit to a smaller unit or a smaller unit to a bigger unit? That's going to help us determine which operation to use. If we're going from a big unit to a small unit, we're going to multiply because we need more of those smaller units to equal the same as a larger unit. However, if we're going from smaller units to bigger units, we're going to divide. The reason is we don't need as many bigger units in order to find an equivalent measurement. Then, our second step is to actually do the multiplying or dividing. And then last but not least, then we need to check for reasonableness by checking our work. The last thing that we need to think about is how the different prefixes connect to one another. So, for instance, if I start with a unit and I want to convert it into deci, it would be times 10. If I want to change it to centi, it would be times 100. If I want to change it into milli, it would be times 1,000. The same is true if I want to take that unit and I want to turn it into a kilo, I would divide by 1,000. We don't really focus on the units that are in between a base unit and kilo. However, you certainly, if you're interested, can do some research online and check it out. The other important thing to note, and you probably recall this from decimals, is that to convert in between units, so if you're not starting with a base unit, let's say I want to change decimeters into centimeters, every time there's only one step, I multiply by that power of 10. So if I'm only going in between one unit, it would be times 10. So deci to centi or centi to milli, that would be times 10. If I do a jump that would be 2 units, then I would need 2 zeros, times 100. With your notes today, don't worry about it being super neat or having to write all of this down exactly. You'll notice my notes are a little bit messy too. There's some great information for you about this on the top of your reteaching page that you can use as a reference as well. Okay, let's do some example problems to see if we can understand how to use these conversions. So first, let's say I want to compare 100 milliliters compared to 1 liter. So if I was a younger student and I didn't understand the same 4th grade knowledge that you have about the meaning of units, if I asked which is bigger, a younger student might say 100 milliliters. They might think this because 100 is a bigger number than 1. However, you as a 4th grader know it's not just about the number, it's also about the unit. So we need to actually do some converting. So using our chart, let's think about this. I know that 1 liter is the same as 1,000 milliliters. So what I know is that if 1 liter equals 1,000 milliliters, that's bigger than 100 milliliters. So I would write 100 milliliters is less than 1 liter. Again, also be careful about your units and make sure that you're using the proper lowercase and capital letters. Let's try another example. This time around, let's say I'm comparing 10 centimeters to 100 decimeters. Make sure you have your reteaching paper in front of you at this point if you don't already, because it will help you with the different conversions. So let's think about this. If I want to change centimeters into decimeters, I'm going from a small unit to a big unit. So that tells me I'm going to divide. On my chart, deci and centi are only one step away. They're units that are next to each other. So I would divide 10 centimeters by 10. I know that 10 divided by 10 is 1, so 10 centimeters is the same as 1 decimeter. So now it becomes very clear that what I originally thought is true. 100 decimeters is greater than 1 decimeter, or 100 decimeters is greater than 10 centimeters. If I read this left to right, I would say 10 centimeters is less than 100 decimeters. Make sure that as you complete your reteaching in practice, you're showing your work. You're actually doing the math in order to make sure that you are converting properly. Let's try another one together. Let's say this time around, I want to see which is bigger, 200 centimeters or 3 meters. I could change centimeters into meters, or I could change meters into centimeters. I typically think that multiplying is easier, so I always like to take the bigger unit and change it into the smaller unit. So in this case, I'm going to change 3 meters and I'm going to change it into centimeters. So let's think about how many centimeters are in 1 meter. Well, I know there are 100, so I'm going to multiply 3 meters times 100 and find that 3 meters is the same as 300 centimeters. So, although they're somewhat close, 200 centimeters is less than 3 meters. Remember, take your time, do your best, use your notes, and as always, you can email me with questions. You also should have noticed by now that with measurement, every couple days I post answer keys so you can go back and check your own work. Being someone who can look at their own work, reflect on it, and improve is a great skill to have for 5th grade. And here's Mr. Groh with your math meme of the day.
Hey, 4th grade, heard you're learning about the metric system. Check out today's meme.